This is John Gilroy from the Federal Tech Podcast.
And this is Matt Chong from Qualtrics.
Today, we're going to talk about how to make government more human. Hit the music, Manny.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, where industry leaders share insights on innovation with a focus on reducing cost and improving security for federal technology. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. In the virtual studio today, we have Matt Chong, Vice President Federal at a company called Qualtrics, Qualtrics. Matt, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
I can't even count the number of podcast interviews I've done. I stopped counting at 1,000. I always go to people's, LinkedIn page, where'd they go to college, their degrees and everything. And I went to yours, and the line is make government more human. So what are we talking about today?
Yeah, I think, for us, it's really, that's the tagline, right? Is how do we make sure that any services that citizens use from a government perspective is easily accessible, and just easy to use, right? Because I think right now we have an all-time low when it comes to trust to government. And our job is to make sure that how do we raise the bar from that perspective?
Now, let me let the cat out of the bag here. We're talking about customer experience on federal websites, and that's what Qualtrics obviously specializes in. And I think most people are under the false assumption that you hire a good graphics designer, you spend 5 hours picking the right color, and then 10 hours of fighting over the words, and then everyone's happy. And then the next level is, no, what you do is you pop a heat map on there, you find it where everyone's clicking. And then there's the next level of, well, we got to engage with our audience. I mean, companies who sell shoes are going through this, and federal agencies are going through this too. And so you guys are not at the what color should we use level. You're way advanced when it comes to customer experience analysis, aren't you? Yeah,
that's exactly it, right? It's not about what's, specifically and how, a website looks. It's more about the why, right? So when you go to a certain website or any digital aspect, right, of a government, it could be an application as well. Is it easy to use, right? How is the federal agency actually getting the feedback from people that, hey, it's easy to navigate. Hey, the information that I'm looking for is there. Hey, if, it takes multiple agencies based on the service that you need, is it easy for me to get to point A, right? Agency one to then another agency that you potentially may need a service in as well. So it's really the navigation as well as the why behind the website and any other digital aspect, whether it's the website and application and so on and so forth. Anything that an agency can do to solicit feedback, we're that mechanism to do so.
Okay, Matt, I'm going to put an MBA hat on you, take you over to Georgetown MBA school, and you're sitting in the classroom there. And the lecturer up there says, how do you measure this? And you raise your hand and you go, surveys. That's the way to do it. Right. And then the instructor is going to go, wrong, Matt. Goes back to the classroom. I mean, everyone thinks a survey is the answer for this, but I'm not a big fan of surveys.
I'm not either. I will, and maybe the company is going to say, hey, Matt, don't say that. But I'm going to be honest with you. I don't either, right? Surveys are kind of like the underlying engine. Like, we get it, right? Surveys are the easiest way to get that solicited, right? The actual human element of the feedback. But where we're going towards right now is how do you get the unsolicited, unstructured data, right? And that's where a lot of these companies don't have like the ability or the forethought to kind of go into how do we make it easier to get feedback, right? And, when you combine both solicit and unsolicited type of feedback mechanisms and data, I mean, that is some powerful things that a company or agency can have.
I mean, let's say John Gilroy knocks on your door. Hey, Mr. Chong, you want to vote for me for representative? You go, oh, no, thanks. Thank you. Shut the door. Then you go, I hate that Gilroy guy. So surveys is the same thing. Someone will take a survey and they may want to be polite. They may not reveal what's really going on in their mind. And that's the only way you're going to understand your customer or your citizen is go below that superficial checkbox. Yes. I mean, you've seen it. I've seen it all the time, haven't you? You've got to go below that superficial stuff.
Yeah. And, imagine this, right? So, someone knocks on the door and you say, yeah, I don't care about, Mr. Gilroy, right? Okay. That's one way. Maybe like the person that was knocking on the door says, ooh, that was not a very good interaction, but that's just like one little data point, right? Someone said just one line. Okay. Well, imagine if Mr. Gilroy had a website, right, where you can get the solicited feedback, but then what if Mr. Gilroy had representatives that are calling all these different people, asking really good questions? And let's say instead of going door to door, you call thousands of people within the area and constituents that live in that area. And let's say just 30%, right? 300 out of 1,000 respond, but you have some really deep and good conversations, ask, what the perception is of Mr. Gilroy and so on and so forth. We automate and transcribe, and then we measure the sentiment when it comes to that conversation, right? And now we're talking about, okay, great, we have voice. How do we combine the voice that we got in addition to the data that you're getting from Mr. Gilroy's website, all the way down to what are people saying about Mr. Gilroy on Twitter, on Reddit, on any type of forum, right? And then you combine all those things.
Well, Matt, I think you have the phrase that pays, as we say in radio, it's sentiment. I mean, how do you measure
Absolutely.
sentiment? This is what everyone wants to know. There's a new owner of a local football team. What's the sentiment? It's not an MBA checkbox answer and list the right things. It's a Simon Sinek that you brought up the word before. It's why. So why are they going to have a change of feeling towards the football team, or why are they going to engage in a website, or is this website is this website biased towards certain types of individuals, and underserved populations maybe don't navigate it as well as, MBAs can navigate it. So I think this is some questions here that are, there's so many subtleties here. And from what I've read from your company is a lot of the way you understand this sentiment is through conversational analysis. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. And I think the basis of conversational analytics or analysis, right, it's just a process of evaluating the customer and the conversations that they're having, right? So if you can cover the interactions, whether it's a chat conversation, a telephone conversation, within the call center, social, and what have you, like we talked about before, right? The outcomes that you can drive, right, are very, very cool, right? Which is, one, you can measure the sentiment of the public perception. You can then reduce things like call volumes from like an ROI perspective, but even better, right? You're triaging people to the support that they need. So you use kind of like the new owner, right, for the Commanders. I mean, look, people care about football, right? And when people care, they're passionate about how to get their feedback to said, thing that they're passionate about. It's the same way, right, with government agencies. You want to go somewhere really cool, international, and you have to get your passport. I just went through the passport process, right? It wasn't easy. Like, they just put down their entire online passport renewal service down for the last 2 to 3 months. And guess what? I had to do things all in person. I had to go, to the post office. I had to go get my picture retaken, right? All those different things, like those different touch points in a customer's journey on a specific service, it matters, right? And if you can improve those different touch points, then that's how you really get a customer that's happy, or a loyal customer, in fact, right? Then people are saying, hey, that passport experience, that was great, right? That was easy. And then that's how you regain that trust, right? And I just use passport, services just because, most people are traveling international or beginning to right after COVID.
Well, 2 days ago, I was at Dulles International dropping 4 people off to head to Ethiopia. So I think I understand something about that.
There you go.
So early in the conversation, I dropped it. I've done over 1,000 pod. Now, some people think I think that's nothing. I think, just what I do. And so these numbers sometimes can impress people. So I went to your website, qualtrics.com, and I got this number. You've analyzed over 3 billion conversations. And I was like, okay, if there's 1,000, but you haven't done 3 billion conversations. And it seems to me this is a great application for artificial intelligence, understanding the subtleties, and then being able to listen very carefully, understand, and then not just sitting out there and taking a walk, but actually doing some action. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think that's, you said something so cool there, right? And it always makes me very proud to work for the company. We have the largest data lake or data repository of sentiment data and analysis of that data, right? If you think about that and what we can do from an AI perspective and train it to make it better for the customers that have our technology, we're talking about some really, really cool stuff, right? Back in the day when I was at Microsoft, they had something called the Intelligent Security Graph. And they would always kind of say, hey, we have and can analyze over 9 billion different touch points of security measures that is running through the Microsoft security lines, right? And when I think about what we can do from a sentiment perspective and all the different data points that we have, which is over 3.5 billion conversations and interactions, we take all of that, right? And we are making it better. We are creating the large database in that. And then we're then putting together these profiles of the world when it comes to sentiment. And I think that is where we are positioned to do some really cool stuff when it comes to AI.
If you're listening to this podcast and there's snow on the ground and you want to learn more, in the show notes for this interview, I will put Matt's article. I think it's called 3 Phases to Begin Modernizing Customer Experience. And you can pull it up and read it. You can, go over the website. I mean, this website's got ebooks and webinars, and they must understand their customer. It's got all this stuff to interact before you ever call Matt, before you ever see a trade show and you see Qualtrics booth. I went to all their webinars and now I can see what's going on. I think that's a variation on listen, understand, and then act. So the idea, we want our listeners, this podcast, to listen to what you have to say and why you're doing it. And then once they understand it, then they can take some action and start there. So, when I went to your website reviewing, I read your article and everything else. What I also saw is that there's something like 85% of the Fortune 100 use your service. It's like, well, they're interested in making money, and you can't sell green shoes when everyone's buying blue shoes, I guess. And so this isn't some kind of a, whoa, these are folks way out in Silicon Valley that no one uses. No, this is very commonly accepted in marketing 101. I'm sure people like Neil Patel and the marketing gurus out there talk about this user experience concept, because this is the only way you can serve your customer, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, you said it best, right? I mean, just think about anything that you're using, right? So for the listeners right now, just think about every interaction that you're having as an experience, right? If you're going over to let's say Foot Locker to buy some shoes, right? If you're going to Under Armour to buy some clothes, right? All those companies want to know what you are thinking, and they want to know your feedback so that they can make their products, their brand, right? Their customer experience or customer service experience that much better, right? And I think if you look at it in that way, then you're now looking at a lens of, okay, anytime you do something, whether it's you going to get a coffee, was that experience good? Because if it was, guess what? You're going to go back. Then when you go back, then you're going to go back again and again. And then when that happens, right, guess what? You are now considered a loyal customer, right? And it only takes one really bad experience for any company or agency to break that trust, right? And that is why it is so important for government agencies, whether you're in federal, state, and local education, or a private sector company like the Fortune 100 companies that you're talking about, John, that's why it's so important. We want to keep our customers, and we have to enable federal agencies to do trust, right? Because federal agencies are about mission, right, and trust. Private companies are about, quite frankly, P&L and revenue, right? It's 2 different things, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we give these companies and agencies an avenue in order to be able to measure that.
Now I'm going to name drop. I mentioned earlier I teach in the grad school at Georgetown there, and so we had a guest speaker earlier this year, a guy named Guy Kawasaki. He's got 1 million followers on Twitter, and he is a big dog, and he spent an hour with my kids. I was just stunned at that. And this guy is he's the nicest guy. And he said, what are you going to do after the interview? Well, I'm going to go surfing. It's really a fun guy. But he got real serious about listening to customers. He said, it has to begin and end with, the citizen or the customer. What does the citizen want? I mean, there's all kinds of varying. Each agency, someone looking for a passport is going to be some different looking for tax information, someone different from FEMA, someone applying for an NIH grant, and then someone with the dispute with the Bureau of Land Management. I mean, and what you have to do is you have to say, look, these people are paying my salary. The customer signs your paycheck. The citizen signs your paycheck. You have to respond to them. And if you don't, I mean, we have an executive order that's kind of is the carrot and the stick for these agencies, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, and if you take a look at what is happening right now, it's actually really cool, right? So over the past couple of years, right, I've noticed like this remarkable shift in the mindset of just government and what's happening with these mandates, right? The momentum and the energy surrounding the importance of customer and employee experience have been quite significant, right? Initiatives like we have the customer experience executive order. We have the President's Management Agenda. We have the 21st Century Act. We have the customer life experiences, right? And all those things have been a inflection point of where we are right now, right? Especially within the federal sector. And I think, I'll draw on one more parallel for you, right? When I was at Microsoft, right, I witnessed this transformative period. When I came in, Steve Ballmer was the CEO at that time. He only cared about on-prem databases, servers, and hardware, right? And then when Satya Nadella, the current CEO, took over, our entire perspective shifted towards the cloud. So it was literally an insane time of 7 years, right, when I was there, of helping customers migrate to the cloud from on-premises, especially in the federal government, and then solving these really big problems, in that time frame. And then at this moment right now, I feel the exact same way when it comes to customer experience. Seriously, right? With the momentum that we're having. And so we have a lot of backing coming from the top, from the president, right? Like you said, John, that's mandating these agencies to look at customer experience in a different way.
Okay, Matt, we're going to put you back in classroom. You're doing your MBA at Georgetown. And so I'm up there lecturing and making up bad jokes and everything else. And so I say to you, Mr. Chong, so you talk about structured and unstructured data. Now, most people think structured data is maybe an Excel spreadsheet, and people think unstructured data maybe is a signal from a satellite. And your website, Mr. Chong, or your recent paper, Mr. Chong, talked about unstructured data from conversations. What does that mean?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned a little bit before of unstructured data is unsolicited, right? We're talking about social voice calls, chats, reviews, and posts. There are ways where agencies don't have to actually solicit or force a human or a person to actually give feedback. And I think that is the way it should go, because let's be honest, a lot of people don't like taking surveys, right? They just don't, even though it's a great way for us to get feedback. And it's kind of like the basis and the foundational of what we do. What half of it is this unstructured data, which is, it's just easier, right? When you pick up the phone and you call any government agency, when you call, let's say like the DMV or anything that you're trying to get the IRS from, a tax perspective, you're calling and your conversation, you're just saying things, right? And you want to say things because that's just kind of like you're trying to either get an answer, you're trying to get into status, or you're trying to just ask questions, right? And what we can do now is essentially transcribe and automate that process for, let's say, an IRS agent. And now, guess what? We know when you were very upset within a call. We know when there needs to be some action based on, something that you said, right? And all those things are just things that you never thought about because you're just saying it, right? And that's what we mean about unsolicited, unstructured, right? It's these conversations that you would be having, but now we're able to measure them and, provide an analysis in them from a feedback perspective.
Okay, if I were able to talk to maybe 10 CTOs or at 10 agencies, I would imagine there'd be a range of maturity for a lot of different range of maturity for zero trust, range of maturity for all kinds of cyber goals, and a range of maturity for this whole idea of UI UX. So what is usually the bottleneck? What usually stops an agency from trying to be successful in this whole understanding user experience?
Well, I think, I'll say right now, agencies are data heavy and insights poor. Right. And
whoa, that's a t-shirt. I like that.
I think, what does that mean, right, John? What that means is getting and gathering data right now. That's not the problem, right? The problem is analyzing that data so people or so agencies are in a position to make sense out of it. And then the most important thing after that, right? Because that's the understanding part. Great. You understand the data. And then what are you going to do with that data, right? That's the bottleneck. That's where people get stuck, right? All these agencies get this data, right? All of them are maybe analyzing it. but no one, right? There's a lot of agencies out there that aren't doing anything with that data. And like, that's where, again, like if we can fix that break and enable through technology, right? And also through people to do the action or the acting part, that's how things get done, right? In federal government. And if we can be that technology mechanism in order for agencies to act, then we are in a really good spot. Then we're actually solving for a problem.
I have a friend who's a professional speaker, and we talk about this all the time. And I say, in a podcast, I don't always know if I use a word and people really understand it, and maybe I'm misusing it and maybe going down the wrong road. And we talk about public speaking. If I'm in front of 1,000 people and I introduce a topic and I can see, Matt Chong in the front row there kind of rolling his eyes, all of a sudden I'm getting feedback and I'm a change. I'm saying, well, Matt, did I say something wrong? He said, well, actually, John, you have no idea what the software development life cycle is. Well, thanks. Tell me what it is. and with public speaking, it's so much better than radio and podcasting. You get that feedback. And I think that's how I think the best podcasters have experience, in stand-up comedians. Joe Rogan, you get feedback from the audience. And so I think this concept of feedback applies in so many different areas of success. I mean, feedback from the people in the agencies, feedback from the citizens, and I think this is why this whole topic of CX is at an advanced level. I think that's where you folks fit in.
Absolutely. And again, like the concept of customer experience and getting feedback, it's not new, right? We've been doing it for 15 plus years, but how we can make that feedback in a way where we can use technology to automate and to be able to listen at scale, right? Like that's the key word. How do you, as an agency, right, listen at scale to your citizens? And we are the crux of that, because we're able to do all that from a technology perspective. And so, in my article, I'm talking about, hey, like this concept of CX is not new. But guess what? There are new players from a tech perspective that can help agencies really speed up the way to make things a lot faster. Like I use the example of things like the FEVS, right? The FEVS is a once a year employee experience type of, survey, right? It's like 3 hours long for a government employee to listen or to fill that out, right? 3 hours long. Then they get the results, but they don't get the results until 7 to 9 months later. Well, guess what? In those 7 to 9 months, a lot of things change. A lot of people's lives change during that time. And what we do is in real time, right? We can show as they're inputting the survey results in real time, and then do the analysis of all the text and the sentiment, and then wrap that up for you right then and there on the same day, right? Those are the things where like, hey, let's like take all the manual processes and make sure that we can get information to people exactly at the same day. If there's a website and one of the web pages just has awful, just maybe formatting, or maybe like the website page has the wrong information, and the customer is able to give you feedback, guess where that feedback goes? It goes to the digital team or the website team within an agency, and they can correct that website that day, right? Otherwise, they would have never known about it, or they might have found out 3 or 4 months later, right? That's how powerful these things can be when it comes to changing things.
A couple weeks back, I interviewed a gentleman. We talked about information technology and operational technology. ITOT, it's a big thing, operational technology. And I learned a whole lot about systems that are based on Windows 95. I learned about MRI systems based on what? On Windows 95? And it costs $500,000 to upgrade them. Anyway, so where does OT fit in this discussion? Does it fit in the discussion?
Absolutely.
Operational data.
It does, right? We like to say kind of like two sides of the coin. You have operational data and you have experience data. The operational data are things like your CRM, right? There are things like your productivity and collaboration tools. So like, let me just give examples to listeners, right? You have things like Salesforce, from a CRM perspective, ServiceNow for like ITSM, Microsoft for, collaboration, right? Think about all the big technologies that you're using. That is operational data, right? That's data that you can get from those systems. Now you have experience data, which is something like Qualtrics, where you're getting data from actual humans, whether it's solicited or unsolicited. What we are able to do, and what a lot of agencies are doing right now, is combining both. And that is really cool, because the operational data, nothing new. When you layer on top the experience data, that's where like some really cool insights come in. And not only can you funnel in just one part of operational data, right? Whether it's like CRM, but then we're talking about all the different technologies. So we can ingest any single data point from an operational perspective and then layer on top of it. So let's talk about like ITSM, right? If you put in a service ticket and that service ticket for you to get a new laptop, right? And that process is like 8 to 12 steps. And it just was not a great experience internally, right? At an agency. Well, guess what? With that, we provide different feedback touch points in that process to say, hey, this in touch point 5 or step 5, this is where you're providing a really bad experience. This is where in that process, it just breaks, right? So then they can pinpoint through a dashboard in that specific touch point for touch point 5 and say, we need to fix something right there, right? Or how do we lower the number of steps, right? If it's a 12-step process, can we make it 3, right? Can we automate some of those things, right? And that's just one example of a laptop, right? With an ITM software that we can ingest, but you put on the feedback layer on top of it.
Interesting. Well, unfortunately, Matt, we are running out of time. But I'm certainly going to sign up for that T-shirt you have coming out. What is it? Data rich and insight poor. I think that's a T-shirt.
That's exactly it. Yes.
You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, Matt Chong, Vice President Federal at Qualtrics.
Appreciate it, John. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Tech Podcast. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.